The pen hovered 2 inches above ivory paper, and Joan Carson knew with absolute bone-deep certainty that she was about to watch a man destroy himself. She'd been refilling water glasses for the past 20 minutes in the private dining room of La Serra, pretending not to notice the tension crackling through the air like a live wire. The 2 men at the corner table radiated the kind of danger that made smart people look away. Joan had learned early in her waitressing career that wealthy men in expensive suits conducting hushed business over untouched plates didn't appreciate audience members. So she'd kept her head down, her movements efficient, her presence forgettable, until she saw the document. It was just a glimpse, barely 3 seconds as she leaned across to top off the water in the crystal tumbler nearest the window, but 3 seconds was all Joan needed. Numbers had always spoken to her in a language other people couldn't hear, whispering their secrets, revealing their lies. And this document? It was screaming. The man holding the pen was younger than she'd initially thought, maybe early 30s, with the kind of presence that made the oxygen in the room feel thinner. Dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from Carrara marble, all sharp angles and harder edges. Ink crawled up the side of his neck, disappearing beneath his collar, and his sleeves were rolled to his elbows, revealing more dark artwork snaking down powerful forearms. He looked like violence poured into an Armani suit. The older man across from him, silver threaded through his temples, navy suit pressed to perfection, leaned forward with barely contained urgency. "Gabriele, sign it. Once you do, the Bianchi family has no legal claim. We walk out clean." Gabriele. The name fit him, old world, elegant, dangerous. Joan watched his jaw work, watched the muscle jump beneath the stubble shadowing his cheek. His eyes dark, depthless, merciless, scanned the document one more time, and she could practically feel the weight pressing down on his shoulders. He was going to sign it, and it was wrong. Every cell in Joan's body screamed at her to walk away. These weren't her people, this wasn't her world, and she had exactly $43 in her checking account, and a mother whose medical bills meant Joan couldn't afford to lose this job over something that absolutely, definitely, 100% was not her business. She made it 3 steps toward the kitchen, then stopped, turned back. Her hand was shaking slightly as she approached the table again, water pitcher clutched like a shield. Both men glanced up at her, the older one with irritation flickering across his features, Gabriele with the blank, assessing stare of a predator, sizing up whether something was prey or threat. "I'm so sorry," Joan heard herself say, her voice steadier than she felt, "but I think there's a problem with your document." The silence that followed could have stopped hearts. The older man, Luca, she'd heard Gabriele call him, straightened in his chair, his expression hardening. "Excuse me?" But Gabriele didn't move, didn't blink, just watched her with those fathomless eyes, and Joan felt pinned in place like a butterfly in a collector's case. "The date here," she continued, committing fully to what was probably a spectacularly bad decision. She gestured toward the paper with her free hand. "Careful not to touch it. March 4th. That's what it says, right?" Gabriele's gaze dropped to the document, then back to her face. He said nothing, but somehow that silence felt like permission. Joan took a breath. The timestamp below it shows 2:47 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, but March 4th this year was the day we switched to daylight saving time. At 2:47 p.m., we would have already been on daylight time, not standard. Whoever created this document didn't account for that. She watched Gabriele's expression shift, not much, just the slightest narrowing of his eyes, the tiniest tightening around his mouth, and the signature. She was on a roll now, her brain firing on all cylinders the way it only did when numbers and patterns aligned. See how the ink darkness is completely uniform? Real signatures have variation, more pressure at the beginning of strokes, lighter at the ends. This looks scanned and overlaid. Luca stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the polished floor. "This is absurd. You're going to take document advice from a waitress?" The word waitress came out like an insult, and Joan felt heat crawl up her neck. "I'm just saying what I see." "What you see." Luca said, voice tight with something that might have been panic beneath the condescension, is a legal treaty that's been verified by our lawyers. Forgive me if your expertise in coffee service doesn't quite measure up to their credentials. Joan opened her mouth to respond, but Gabriele raised one hand, a small gesture that somehow commanded absolute silence. Explain the font, he said, still looking at Joan. She blinked. Sorry? You mentioned the timestamp, the numbers. What about the font? Joan leaned closer, studying the document again. She could feel the heat radiating off Gabriele's body, could smell something expensive and cedar dark that definitely didn't come from a department store. The timestamp font is Arial, but the rest of the document uses Times New Roman. Most legal documents stick to one font family for consistency. Switching between them in the same paragraph suggests different editing sessions, possibly different authors. This is ridiculous, Luca interjected. Gabriele, we don't have time for this. The Bianchi representatives will be here in less than an hour expecting— I didn't ask you. Gabriele's voice was quiet, but it cut through Luca's protest like a blade through silk. He turned his full attention to Joan, and she felt the impact of that focus like a physical thing. What's your name? Joan. Carson. I work the morning shift mostly, but I picked up today because Marissa called in sick, and— She stopped herself, realizing she was babbling. Joan. My name is Joan. Joan. He said it slowly, like he was testing the weight of it. Do you have a degree in forensic accounting? Document authentication? No, I have 16 credit hours toward a data analytics degree that I can't afford to finish, and a really annoying habit of noticing when things don't add up. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face, gone so quickly she couldn't be sure it had ever been there. And these things? He gestured to the document. They don't add up? Not even close. Gabriele held her gaze for another long moment, and Joan felt something shift in the air between them, recognition, maybe, or the spark of two minds that worked in similar patterns, even if they lived in completely different worlds. Then he stood, unfolding from his chair with lethal grace, and Joan had to tilt her head back to keep eye contact. He was tall, much taller than she'd realized, and built like someone who understood violence intimately. Luca, Gabriele said, never looking away from Joan. Call Marco. Tell him I need the original digital file pulled from the server. Authentication codes, metadata, everything. Gabriele, this is unnecessary. Now. The single word carried enough weight to make Luca's protest die in his throat. He pulled out his phone with jerky movements, stepping away from the table. Gabriele reached down and carefully picked up the document, holding it toward the light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. If you're wrong, he said conversationally, you just interrupted one of the most important negotiations of my life over clock changes and typography. Joan's stomach dropped. But if you're right. He turned those dark eyes on her again, and Joan saw something dangerous and grateful warring in their depths. If you're right, Joan Carson. You just saved my empire. From across the room, Luca's voice rose in sharp confusion. That's impossible. Marco, check again. The metadata can't be. He fell silent, his face draining of color. Gabriele's expression didn't change, but Joan felt the temperature in the room plummet. What did Marco say? Gabriele asked, his voice soft as a knife sliding from its sheath. Luca's hand tightened around his phone. The file was edited 4 hours ago, from an IP address that's not in our network. The pen Gabriele had been holding hit the table with a sharp crack. Sign it, Gabriele, Luca said quietly, and now his voice carried a tremor Joan couldn't identify. Please, just sign it. But Gabriele didn't move. He was staring at Joan, and she saw the exact moment everything clicked into place behind his eyes. The betrayal, the setup, the knife that had been aimed at his back. Get her out of here, Gabriele said, his gaze still locked on Joan's face. What? Joan and Luca spoke simultaneously. The waitress, get her out, now. But before anyone could move, the door to the private dining room opened, and 3 men in dark suits stepped inside. They weren't restaurant staff. And they were all carrying guns. Joan's first coherent thought, as 3 armed men filed into Lacera's private dining room, was that she should have called in sick today. Her second thought was that sick might become a permanent condition if she didn't figure out how to disappear in the next 30 seconds. But Gabrielle's hand was still on her wrist, not restraining, just present, like an anchor in a storm, and his voice was steady as he addressed the newcomers. "Gentlemen, you're early." The man in front, tall and broad-shouldered with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, smiled without warmth. Mr. Bianchi wanted to ensure there were no complications. "No complications," Gabriella assured him, releasing Joan's wrist to gesture casually toward the document still lying on the table. "Just standard due diligence." Joan took a careful step backward, trying to blend into the wallpaper. The water pitcher in her hands suddenly felt absurdly inadequate as a defense mechanism. What was she supposed to do if things went south? Hydrate them aggressively? The scarred man's gaze flicked to her, lingering just long enough to make her skin crawl. "And she is?" "Staff," Gabriella said flatly, in a tone that suggested the conversation was over. But Joan's brain, apparently committed to self-destruction today, chose that moment to fully process what she'd just witnessed. The metadata discrepancy, the forged signatures, the careful manipulation designed to strip Gabriella of everything. And Luca Gabrielle's own advisor had been pushing him to sign it. She looked at the older man, still standing by the window with his phone clutched in white-knuckled fingers, and saw guilt written across his features like graffiti on a pristine wall. "Oh no," Joan whispered, the pieces clicking together with horrifying clarity. Gabrielle heard her. His eyes cut to her face, sharp and assessing, and she watched understanding dawn. He could see that she'd figured something out, something that clearly showed on her face because she'd never been good at poker. "Joan," he said quietly. "Kitchen, now." It was phrased like a suggestion, but carried the weight of a command. Joan nodded, already turning toward the door, when Luca's voice stopped her. "She can't leave." Every person in the room went still. Gabrielle turned slowly, his movement precise and predatory. "Excuse me?" Luca's face had gone from pale to gray, his expression that of a man standing on the edge of a cliff with nowhere to run. "She knows too much. She's seen the document, heard about the metadata. If she talks..." "She won't talk," Gabrielle interrupted, his voice dropping to something deadly soft. "You can't guarantee that." "I can guarantee," Gabrielle said, each word sharp as a blade, "that if anyone in this room threatens my staff, they'll regret it." The scarred man shifted his stance, his hand drifting toward his jacket, and Joan's stomach dropped straight through the floor. This was it. This was how she died, caught in the crossfire of a Mafia power play because she couldn't keep her observations to herself. Her mother was going to be so disappointed. "Luca," Gabriella continued, never taking his eyes off the armed men, "you're going to explain to me, very carefully, why you're suddenly concerned about a waitress overhearing a conversation. Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like you have something to hide." Luca's laugh was brittle. "Don't be paranoid. I'm just thinking about operational security. You taught me that. I also taught you not to lie to my face." The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch, and Joan found herself pressed against the wall, trying to calculate the distance to the door. Maybe 10 feet. She could make it in 5 seconds if she ran, unless someone shot her, in which case she'd make it approximately nowhere. "Mr. Marino." Joan's voice came out smaller than she'd intended. "I really don't want to be here anymore." Something flickered across Gabrielle's face, concern maybe, or recognition that he'd dragged her into something far more dangerous than a simple document review. "I know. Give me 1 minute." "I'm not sure we have a minute," Joan said, eyeing the scarred man's hand, which was now definitely resting on something weapon-shaped inside his jacket. Gabriella followed her gaze, and his expression hardened into something that made Joan's breath catch. "Marco!" he called, not looking away from the armed men. "Get in here!" Seconds later, the door opened again, and a younger man entered mid-20s, lean and sharp-eyed, with the kind of vigilance that suggested he'd seen violence up close. He took in the scene instantly. Gabriele tense and dangerous, Luca cornered and desperate, 3 Bianchi enforcers with hands near weapons, and Joan flattened against the wall like she was trying to merge with the paint. "Boss?" Marco's hand disappeared behind his back, emerging with a gun he held with practiced ease. "Joan Carson," Gabriele said, his voice steady despite the powder keg atmosphere, "is under my protection. Anyone who touches her answers to me. Make sure Mr. Bianchi's associates understand that." The scarred man's smile widened. "This is a private business matter, Marino. Why involve a civilian?" "She's involved because she saved me from signing a forged document," Gabriele replied, his tone casual but his body language screaming barely controlled violence. "Which means someone went to considerable effort to forge Bianchi family signatures and plant false information in my organization. I'm very interested in finding out who." "That's absurd," the scarred man said. But something shifted in his expression calculation, replacing confidence. "Is it?" Gabriele picked up the document, holding it toward the light. "Joan, come here." Every instinct Joan possessed screamed at her to refuse, but Gabriele's eyes held a strange mixture of command and reassurance that made her feet move despite her better judgment. She crossed the room on shaking legs, hyper-aware of multiple sets of eyes tracking her movement. When she reached Gabriele's side, he angled the document toward her. "Show them what you showed me." Joan's hands trembled as she pointed to the timestamp. "Eastern Standard Time on March 4th is impossible because we'd already switched to daylight time. The signature's ink density is too uniform for a manual signing. And," she squinted at something she'd noticed earlier but hadn't mentioned, "there's a second issue." "Go on," Gabriele encouraged. "The paper itself." Joan touched the edge carefully. "This feels like premium stock, but the watermark is slightly off-center. Marino family documents use precision-aligned watermarks. I noticed it earlier on some correspondence in the lobby." She hadn't meant to admit she'd been studying their paperwork, but the words were already out. Gabriele's mouth twitched. "You studied my family's correspondence in the lobby?" "I was bored waiting for my shift," Joan defended. "And you have very nice letterhead. The typography is excellent. Despite everything, the guns, the tension, the very real possibility of imminent violence," Gabriele laughed. It was a short, surprised sound that transformed his face from dangerous to devastating. The scarred man didn't look amused. "This is ridiculous. We're taking the word of a waitress over authenticated legal documents?" "I'm taking the word of someone with no reason to lie," Gabriele corrected, "over documents that are suddenly looking very suspicious." He turned to Luca, and all traces of humor vanished. "How long have you known?" Luca's face crumpled. "Gabriele, please." "How long?" 3 weeks. The confession came out broken. "They approached me 3 weeks ago. Said if I didn't cooperate, they'd kill Elena." "Elena?" "Luca's daughter." Joan had served her coffee last month, bright, cheerful, studying architecture at Columbia. Gabriele's expression didn't change, but Joan felt the temperature drop. "And you didn't tell me." "I couldn't." "They had surveillance on her apartment, her campus, everywhere. They showed me photos, Gabriele. Photos of her walking to class, sitting in the library, sleeping in her own bed." Luca's voice broke. "What was I supposed to do?" "You were supposed to trust me," Gabriele said quietly, and somehow that soft tone was more devastating than shouting. "You were supposed to come to me so we could protect her together. Instead, you helped them forge documents to steal my empire. I didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice." Gabriele set the document down with deliberate care. "You just made the wrong one." The scarred man cleared his throat. "This is all very touching. But Mr. Bianchi is expecting that signature within the hour. Whatever personal drama you're experiencing, it doesn't change our agreement." "We don't have an agreement," Gabriele said flatly. "We have a forgery. And the moment you walked in here with your hand on a weapon in my restaurant, you declared war. We're simply here to collect what's owed." Based on a fabricated document? I don't think so. The scarred man's smile turned cold. Then I'm afraid we have a problem, Mr. Marino, because Mr. Bianchi doesn't take kindly to broken promises, and he has a very long memory. So do I, Gabriella replied, and I remember every single person who's tried to take what's mine. Would you like to know what happened to them? Joan decided this was an excellent time to interrupt before someone started shooting. Excuse me? Not to interfere with the whole intimidation thing you've got going, but maybe we could all take a breath and… Joan, Gabriella said without looking at her, this isn't the time. Actually, it's exactly the time, she countered, her survival instinct finally overriding her tendency to stay quiet. Because in about 30 seconds someone's going to draw a gun, then everyone else is going to draw guns, and I really don't want to die in a room that serves $17 cappuccinos. Marco snorted, though he kept his weapon trained on the Bianchi enforcers. She has a point, he muttered. Gabriele finally looked at Joan, and she saw something shifting in his expression, concern warring with calculation. What do you suggest? I suggest, Joan said, surprised by her own steadiness, that we verify the document's authenticity with a neutral third party before anyone does something they'll regret. There are forensic authentication services that can analyze paper stock, ink composition, digital metadata, everything. If the document's legitimate, you sign it. If it's fake, everyone walks away and figures out who's actually behind this mess. The scarred man's eyes narrowed. That could take days. Better than bloodshed in a restaurant, Joan pointed out. Think of the upholstery. Despite the tension, despite everything, Gabriele's mouth curved into something that might have been admiration. You're either very brave or very foolish. Can't I be both? Apparently. The scarred man exchanged glances with his companions, some silent communication passing between them. Then he pulled out his phone, stepping away to make a call. Gabriele moved closer to Joan, his voice dropping to a murmur only she could hear. When this is over, you and I are going to have a very long conversation about self-preservation instincts. Looking forward to it, Joan whispered back. Does it involve me keeping my job? It involves you never having to serve overpriced cappuccinos again. Before Joan could process that statement, the scarred man returned, his expression unreadable. Mr. Bianchi agrees to third-party authentication, but he wants assurances that the document remains secure until verification is complete. Done, Gabriele said. Marco, get Alessandro on the phone. Tell him we're moving the signing to neutral ground pending authentication. And tell him, his smile turned sharp, I'm very interested in discussing who had access to his family's signature stamps. As Marco made the call, Luca collapsed into a chair, his face in his hands. Joan felt an unexpected surge of sympathy. He'd been trapped, coerced, backed into an impossible corner by people who knew exactly which pressure points to push. She'd been ready to hate him 5 minutes ago. Now she just felt sad. Your daughter, Joan said quietly, moving closer to Luca. Elena. Is she safe right now? Luca looked up with red-rimmed eyes. I don't know. They said they'd release her once, Gabriele signed, but I don't know if I can trust them. You can't, Gabrielle said bluntly, but we'll get her back anyway. How? Leave that to me. Gabriele pulled out his own phone, firing off a rapid series of texts. Joan, I need you to write down everything you noticed about the document, every detail, no matter how small. Right now? Right now. Marco produced a notepad from seemingly nowhere, and Joan found herself scribbling observations while armed men watched her with varying degrees of hostility and curiosity. The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on her 4 hours ago. Her biggest concern had been whether the lunch rush would tip well. Now she was documenting evidence in what was clearly a Mafia power play. Her mother was going to have so many questions. Done, Joan said, handing the notepad to Gabriele. Their fingers brushed, and she felt the calluses on his hands, evidence of a life that involved more than paperwork and negotiations. Gabriele scanned her notes, his expression growing darker with each line. You're sure about the watermark alignment? I'm sure about everything, Joan confirmed. That document is as fake as my enthusiasm for another double shift. Another brief smile gone almost before it appeared. Then we have our proof. And someone has considerable explaining to do. The scarred man's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression tightening. Mr. Bianchi wants to meet. 1 hour. Russo's warehouse on the pier. Neutral ground, Gabriella countered. I'm not walking into a Bianchi stronghold with forged documents and unanswered questions. The warehouse is neutral. We use it for disputed negotiations. Fine, but I'm bringing my own security. And, Gabrielle glanced at Joan, she comes with me. What? Joan and the scarred man spoke simultaneously. Absolutely not, the enforcer continued. This is family business. She's the only one who can identify the forgery elements definitively, Gabrielle argued. She's a witness. She comes. Gabriella, Joan hissed, I really don't think I should. You'll be safe, he said. And the conviction in his voice was almost enough to make her believe it. I promise. You can't promise that, Joan said. You don't even know me. I know you saved my empire. That's enough. The scarred man made a disgusted sound. 1 hour, Russo's warehouse, come armed, and the deal's off. I'm always armed, Gabrielle replied calmly, but I'll keep weapons holstered, unless someone gives me a reason not to. The Bianchi enforcers filed out, leaving behind a silence so heavy Joan could barely breathe. Luca stood on shaking legs. What do you want me to do? Find your daughter, Gabrielle said. Take Marco and whoever else you need, get Elena somewhere safe, then we'll discuss your future in this organization. Gabrielle, I'm so... Save it. Right now, all that matters is Elena's safety. Go. Luca left, Marco following after casting one last assessing look at Joan, and then it was just the two of them, a mafia boss and a waitress who'd stumbled into something far bigger than either of them had anticipated. So, Joan said into the silence, that was exciting. Gabriella turned to her, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, she saw genuine emotion flicker across his face, relief, gratitude, and something else she couldn't quite identify. You should run, he said quietly. Walk out that door, forget everything you've seen, and go back to your life. Should, Joan agreed. But I have a feeling you're not going to let me. I won't stop you. No. But you need me at that warehouse. You need someone who can point out every inconsistency, every forged element. You need proof that holds up under scrutiny. She met his eyes steadily. You need me. Gabrielle studied her for a long moment, and Joan had the dizzying sensation of being weighed, measured, and found somehow worthy. Yes, he finally said. I do. Then I guess I'm going to a warehouse on the pier. Joan tried for levity, though her hands were still shaking. Is that the kind of place where people usually leave alive? Usually. That's not as reassuring as you think it is. His smile was brief, warm, and entirely unexpected. Welcome to my world, Joan Carson. It's terrifying, she informed him. I don't recommend it. Most people don't stumble into it by accident. I have a gift for bad timing. Or perfect timing. Gabriella picked up the forged document, studying it with renewed intensity. If you hadn't spoken up, I would have signed this. Would have given them everything. So either you have the worst luck in the world, or the best. I'm going with worst, Joan decided. Definitely worst. But as Gabrielle's eyes met hers again, something passed between them, recognition, maybe, or the beginning of understanding. She'd saved him, and now, whether she liked it or not, he was going to protect her, even if it meant dragging her straight into the lion's den. We leave in 45 minutes, Gabriella said, his tone shifting back to business. I need to make some calls, arrange security, brief my people. You should eat something, it might be a long night. I'm not hungry. Eat anyway. You'll need your strength. Joan wanted to argue, but the command in his voice made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. So she found herself in Lacera's kitchen, mechanically consuming a sandwich she couldn't taste, while the reality of her situation crashed over her in waves. She was going to a warehouse meeting with the Mafia. She'd just exposed a forgery that someone had gone to considerable trouble to create. And Gabriele Marino, dangerous, powerful, terrifying Gabriele Marino, had looked at her like she was something precious. Joan's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "How's work, honey?" She stared at the screen, trying to figure out how to respond. "Eventful," she finally typed. "I'll explain later. Love you." Her mother responded with a heart emoji, blissfully unaware that her daughter had just become a key witness in what was probably a massive criminal conspiracy. Joan set down her half-eaten sandwich and pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. This morning, she'd been nobody, invisible, just another waitress grinding through double shifts and student debt. Now, she was essential. And absolutely, completely terrified. The kitchen door swung open, and Gabriele appeared, having traded his jacket for a dark sweater that somehow made him look even more dangerous. "Ready?" "No," Joan said honestly. "But I don't think that matters." "It doesn't." He held out his hand. "But I meant what I said. You're under my protection. Nothing happens to you." Joan looked at his outstretched hand, scarred knuckles, strong fingers, the promise of both violence and safety wrapped in one gesture. She took it. His grip was warm, solid, anchoring. "Let's go expose a conspiracy," she said, trying for bravery. Gabriele's smile was sharp as a blade. "Let's." They walked through the restaurant together, past staff who stared with barely concealed shock at the boss holding hands with the morning shift waitress. Joan felt their eyes burning into her back, felt the weight of questions she couldn't answer. Outside, a black car waited, sleek and expensive, and probably bulletproof. Gabriele opened the door for her, a gesture of old-world courtesy that felt surreal given the circumstances. Joan slid into the leather seat, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was it. The moment where her ordinary life officially ended, and something else began. Something dangerous. Something thrilling. Something that would either save them both, or destroy everything. Gabriele settled beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off his body, smell that cedar-dark scent that made her thoughts scatter. "Joan," he said as the car pulled away from La Serra, "if anything goes wrong tonight, I want you to run. Don't look back, don't try to help, just run. I'm not leaving you." His eyes widened, slightly surprised. Maybe, that she'd commit so quickly to someone she barely knew. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "I know." Joan met his gaze steadily. "But you're not the only one who keeps promises. You said I'd be safe. I'm holding you to that. And in return, I'm not running." Gabriele stared at her for a long moment, something fierce and grateful burning in his expression. "You're going to be trouble," he said softly. "Probably," Joan agreed. His hand found hers again in the space between them, fingers interlacing with a certainty that felt like sealing a pact. "Good," Gabriele murmured. "I'm tired of people who don't challenge me." The car turned toward the docks, toward a warehouse where answers waited alongside danger. And Joan Carson, who'd woken up this morning expecting nothing more exciting than arguing with an espresso machine, held tight to the hand of a Mafia boss and tried not to think about all the ways this could end badly. But deep down, beneath the terror and adrenaline, something else stirred. The electric thrill of being seen. Of mattering. Of standing beside someone powerful and being treated as an equal. She'd saved his empire. Now she just had to survive the fallout. The warehouse loomed ahead, dark and industrial against the evening sky. And as they approached, Joan saw figures waiting in the shadows, too many figures, armed and ready. Gabriele's hand tightened on hers. "Stay close," he whispered. "Always," Joan promised. And together, they walked into the darkness. The warehouse smelled like salt, rust, and old violence. Joan's sneakers squeaked against the concrete as she followed Gabriele through the massive space, their footsteps echoing off corrugated metal walls. Industrial lights hung from chains overhead, casting harsh shadows that turned every corner into a potential threat. Alessandro Bianchi waited in the center of the room, flanked by a dozen men who looked like they ate nails for breakfast. He was older than Joan had expected, 70s, maybe, with silver hair swept back from a lined face that might have been handsome once. Now it just looked predatory. "Gabriele," Bianchi called, his voice carrying easily across the empty space. "You bring interesting company to negotiations." "She's my forensic consultant," Gabriele replied smoothly, his hand a steady presence at the small of Joan's back, protective, possessive, grounding. "Your consultant wears an apron." "My consultant has sharper eyes than your entire legal team?" Bianchi's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Let's see what those sharp eyes found. Shall we?" Gabriele gestured toward a metal table someone had set up in the middle of the warehouse neutral ground. Joan supposed, though nothing about this situation felt neutral. He placed the document down carefully, and Joan stepped forward, trying to ignore the weight of hostile gazes tracking her movement. "The timestamp," she began, her voice steadier than she felt, "shows Eastern Standard Time for a date that should reflect daylight saving time." "That's the first inconsistency." "Clerical error." One of Bianchi's lawyers interjected, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and the personality of a tax form. "Maybe," Joan conceded, "but combined with the signature overlay, look at the uniform ink density, it suggests digital manipulation rather than manual signing." She pulled out her phone, opening the photos she'd taken of the document back at La Sera. "But the real problem is this." She zoomed in on a tiny emblem near the bottom corner, so small she'd almost missed it initially. "See this serpent symbol? It's embedded in the watermark." Gabriele leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. "I don't recognize it." "You wouldn't," Bianchi said, his tone shifting to something darker. "That's not our symbol." The admission landed like a bomb in the silent warehouse. "Then whose is it?" Gabriele demanded. "That," Bianchi said slowly, "is an excellent question." Joan's fingers flew across her phone screen, running an image search she'd started in the car. When the results loaded, her stomach dropped. "The Serpentes Cartel, based in Nevada. They've been expanding east for the past 2 years. According to," she scrolled quickly, "about 50 different law enforcement bulletins." Every man in the warehouse tensed. "Impossible," the lawyer sputtered. "We verified every element of that treaty with our authentication team." "Then, your authentication team missed something," Joan said. "Or, someone on your team is working for the Serpentes." The temperature plummeted. Bianchi's face hardened into something carved from granite. "That's a serious accusation, young lady." "It's a serious forgery," Joan shot back, surprising herself with her boldness. "Someone went to considerable effort to make this look legitimate. They used your family's signature stamps, Marino family letterhead, legal formatting that matches both organizations. This wasn't some amateur operation. This was sophisticated, coordinated, and designed to trigger exactly what it almost did, a signature that would have transferred key territories and started a war between your families, leaving both organizations weakened." Gabriele finished quietly, his eyes sharp with understanding. "Vulnerable to takeover by a third party." "The Serpentes?" Bianchi said, his voice cold as winter. "They want the eastern ports. And they almost got them." Gabriele picked up the document, holding it toward the harsh overhead lights. "Joan, what else?" She studied the paper again, her mind cataloging details. The routing information in the metadata, Marco pulled it earlier. The IP address traced to a server historically used by Marino insiders, right? Gabriele nodded, his expression grim. "But the server connection shows a VPN redirect through..." She checked her phone again, reading Marco's technical breakdown. "Las Vegas, same city as Serpentes headquarters. Someone inside your organization was used to plant this forgery, but the actual creation came from Nevada." "Luca," Bianchi said. "No." Gabriele's voice was flat, certain. "Luca was coerced, his daughter was threatened. He cooperated under duress, but he didn't create the forgery." "Then who did?" Gabriele pulled out his phone, firing off a text. Seconds later, Marco responded with a name that made Gabriele's jaw tighten. "Raffaele," he said, the name tasting like poison. My capo for Eastern operations. He had access to our authentication systems, our legal templates, everything needed to create a convincing forgery. And motive? Bianchi asked. Ambition. He's been pushing for more territory, more control. I've been holding him back. Gabriele's smile was terrible. Apparently, he decided to take matters into his own hands. Joan's mind raced ahead, connecting dots. If Raffaele worked with the Serpentes to forge the document and used Luca as a decoy to push you toward signing, then the plan was to have you surrender key territories to the Bianchi family. Who would then be blamed when those territories fell to Serpente's control shortly after? Bianchi finished, his eyes narrowing, making it look like we'd orchestrated the whole thing as a power grab. Gabriele would retaliate against my family, we'd go to war, and the Serpentes would sweep in during the chaos. Elegant, Gabriele said coldly. And it almost worked. Except for her. Bianchi's gaze settled on Joan with something that might have been grudging respect. Your waitress saw what our lawyers missed. She has a name, Gabriele said quietly, dangerously, and she's under my protection. Noted. Bianchi turned to his own men. Find everyone who touched that document on our end. I want names, access logs, everything. Someone on my side helped plant this forgery, and they're going to answer for it. His men scattered, phones already out. Joan's phone buzzed with an incoming message, unknown number. Her thumb hovered over the delete button, but curiosity won. She opened it. Clever girl. Too clever. Walk away while you still can. Ice slid down her spine. Gabriele, she whispered, showing him the screen. His expression transformed into something murderous. They're watching us. Right now. As if on cue, the warehouse lights flickered. Then died completely. Darkness swallowed everything. Joan felt Gabriele's arm wrap around her waist, pulling her against his body with protective force. She could hear shouting, the sound of weapons being drawn, footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. Don't move, Gabriele breathed against her ear. Stay exactly where you are. Something metal crashed in the darkness. A door, maybe. Or a shelf, more shouting. The unmistakable sound of a safety clicking off. Then, cutting through the chaos, a voice Joan didn't recognize. Hello, Gabriele. We need to talk about what belongs to whom. The lights flickered back on, revealing a new figure standing in the warehouse entrance, tall, sharp-suited, with a serpent tattoo crawling up his neck. Behind him, at least 20 armed men blocked the exits. They were surrounded. And the man with the serpent tattoo was smiling like he'd already won. My name is Dante Reyes, he said, his accent carrying traces of Mexico beneath polished English. And I believe you have something that's about to become mine. Dante Reyes looked like money, violence, and calculated patience wrapped in a custom suit. The serpent tattoo coiling up his neck seemed to pulse under the harsh warehouse lights, and his smile held the kind of confidence that came from holding all the cards. Joan's first instinct was to hide behind Gabriele. Her second was to catalog every exit and calculate her chances of reaching any of them. Approximately 0, her brain supplied helpfully. You have impressive timing, Gabriele said, his voice carrying none of the tension Joan could feel thrumming through his body. His arm remained around her waist, steel disguised as protection. Breaking into a private meeting. Very bold. Not breaking in, Dante corrected, gesturing around the warehouse. This is Russo territory. Neutral ground, remember? And Russo owes me several favors. He tilted his head, studying Joan with unsettling interest. The waitress who ruined months of careful planning. You're more perceptive than our intelligence suggested. Your intelligence needs better funding, Joan heard herself say, then immediately regretted it when 20 guns shifted slightly in her direction. Dante laughed, a genuine sound that somehow made him more terrifying. I like her. Gabriele, you always did have interesting taste in protection details. She's not protection. She's... Gabriele paused, and Joan felt him recalibrate. She's with me. The possessiveness in those 3 words sent heat crawling up Joan's neck, despite the mortal danger surrounding them. Bianchi stepped forward. his earlier hostility toward Gabriele apparently forgotten in the face of a mutual threat. "Reyes, if you think you can waltz into our territory and claim what's ours—" "Your territory?" Dante's smile widened. "Alessandro, you're operating on outdated information. Half your Eastern operations are already mine. I own your suppliers, your distribution networks, your warehouse managers. You just don't know it yet." The color drained from Bianchi's face. "And, Gabriele," Dante's attention swung back like a predator spotting movement, "your ambitious capo Raffaele has been very cooperative. Very eager to discuss how a partnership with the Serpentes could elevate his position." Gabriele's expression didn't change, but Joan felt his muscles coil. "Where is he?" "Nearby, waiting to see how this conversation ends." Dante pulled out a tablet, swiping through what looked like financial records. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign a revised version of that treaty, properly forged this time, with authentic signatures transferring 40% of your Eastern operations to my organization. In exchange, I don't release the evidence I have of your various legal complications to the FBI. Evidence you fabricated," Gabriele said flatly. "Evidence that will look very real to federal prosecutors." Dante's smile never wavered. "Money laundering, racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder. I have digital trails, testimony from cooperative witnesses, even some genuine documents you probably thought were secure. Whether it's true or not doesn't matter. The investigation alone would cripple you for years." Joan's mind raced through the implications. Fabricated evidence was surprisingly easy to create if you had the right technical skills and access. And if the Serpentes had infiltrated Marino operations deeply enough to forge one document, they could have planted dozens more. "You're bluffing," she said, surprised by her own steadiness. "Digital evidence is too easy to discredit with metadata analysis. Any decent forensic accountant would spot inconsistencies in—" "In what?" Dante interrupted, his eyes gleaming. "The offshore accounts I've been feeding money into for 6 months using Marino routing numbers? The encrypted communications I've been sending from IP addresses inside Gabriele's organization? I haven't been faking evidence. Miss Carson, I've been creating it. Real transactions, real communications, all designed to build a prosecution case that will survive any scrutiny." The warehouse seemed to tilt. "That's why the forgery had to be perfect," Joan realized, the pieces clicking together. "You needed Gabriele to sign something that would look legitimate under investigation. When the FBI came looking, and you'd make sure they did, they'd find that treaty as evidence of illegal territory deals. It would corroborate your fake evidence and make everything else more credible." Dante slow-clapped, the sound echoing mockingly. "Beautiful. You see, Gabriele? This is why you should have kept her in the restaurant. Touch her and I'll make sure your body's never found," Gabriele said conversationally. "Threats are boring. Negotiations are productive." Dante set the tablet down on the metal table. "Sign the revised treaty. Accept my partnership. Or I destroy you with evidence that will look authentic enough to put you away for 20 years. Your choice." Gabriele was silent for a long moment, and Joan could practically hear him calculating odds, assessing options, planning 3 moves ahead. Then he laughed, a cold, dangerous sound that made several of Dante's men shift uncomfortably. "You made one critical mistake," Gabriele said. "Enlighten me. You assumed I need the FBI to think I'm legitimate." Gabriele's smile was all teeth. "I don't. What I need is to eliminate threats to my organization. And you just identified yourself as the biggest one." Dante's expression finally flickered, uncertainty bleeding through his confidence. "Marco," Gabriele called without raising his voice. The warehouse's side door exploded inward, and 15 men poured through, not Gabriele's usual security, Joan realized, but something else. They moved with military precision, weapons raised, positioning themselves with practiced efficiency that spoke of professional training. "Friends of yours?" Dante asked, but his voice had lost its certainty. "Private military contractors," Gabriele replied. "I called them an hour ago, right after Joan identified your serpent emblem. They've been surrounding this warehouse for the past 20 minutes, waiting for my signal. Joan stared at him. He'd known. He'd walked into this meeting knowing it was a trap, and had prepared accordingly. "You're outnumbered," Dante said, though his men were already looking nervous. "I'm really not." Gabriele pulled out his phone, showing Dante a live security feed. "See that? Those are federal agents parked 3 blocks away. I called them too. Gave them everything Joan documented about your forgery operation, your infiltration of Bianchi territory, your fabricated evidence scheme. They're very interested in discussing interstate racketeering charges." Dante's face went carefully blank. "So, here's my counteroffer," Gabriele continued, his voice dropping to something deadly soft. "You tell me where Raffaele is, you turn over every piece of fabricated evidence you've created, and you disappear from my territory permanently. In exchange, I don't hand you to the FBI right now. And if I refuse?" Gabriele's smile was terrible. "Then I call them in, and you spend the next 30 years in federal prison explaining to prosecutors exactly how you've been infiltrating legitimate business operations to build criminal enterprises. I'm sure they'll be fascinated." The standoff stretched, tension crackling like lightning about to strike. Then Luca's voice cut through from somewhere behind them. "Gabriele, we found him." Joan turned to see Luca emerging from a side office, his face grim, his hands on the shoulders of a man she'd seen before in La Sera, one of Gabriele's senior people, well-dressed and cold-eyed. "Raffaele." But it was what Luca said next that made Joan's blood freeze. And he wasn't working for the Serpentes, he was working with them as an equal partner. The Nevada operation? It's not just Dante's. Raffaele co-founded it 2 years ago. He's been building his own empire inside yours, using your resources to fund it. He didn't betray you for money, Gabriele. Luca's expression was stricken. He betrayed you because he's been planning to take everything from the beginning. And according to the documents we found, Luca held up a folder, his hand shaking. "He's already moved 60% of your liquid assets offshore. You're broke, Gabriele. He's already taken your empire." The warehouse erupted into chaos, and Joan, watching Gabriele's face transform into something beyond rage, something cold and final and absolutely lethal, realized they'd all been playing the wrong game. The real war hadn't even started yet. The silence lasted exactly 2 seconds before everything exploded. Raffaele lunged sideways, breaking free from Luca's grip with practiced violence. Dante's men raised their weapons. Gabriele's contractors moved forward in tactical formation, and somewhere in the chaos, someone fired a shot that pinged off the metal ceiling, raining rust down like deadly confetti. Joan's survival instinct finally kicked in. She dropped to the concrete, hands over her head, cursing every decision that had led her to this moment. "Nobody moves!" Gabriele's voice cut through the pandemonium with commanding force. He had his own weapon out now. When had that happened? Aimed steadily at Raffaele's chest. 60% of my liquid assets. Explain. Now." Raffaele straightened his jacket with insulting casualness, a smile playing at his lips. "It's quite simple, really. You were so focused on external threats, the Bianchis, the Russians, the competition. You never considered that your real enemy was sitting across from you at family dinners. 2 years, Gabriele said, his voice dangerously quiet. You've been stealing from me for 2 years. Not stealing, reallocating. You're too conservative, Gabriele, too tied to the old ways. The Marino family could be an empire, but you keep it a kingdom. Raffaele's eyes gleamed with ambition that bordered on mania. I'm building something bigger, something that doesn't answer to outdated codes and blood loyalties. Joan, still flattened against the concrete, watched the scene unfold with horrified fascination. From her ground-level perspective, she could see something nobody else had noticed, a thin wire running from Raffaele's sleeve to his palm. A dead man's switch. "Gabriele!" she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. "He's wired. Look at his left hand." Everyone's attention snapped to Raffaele, who smiled wider. "Smart girl. Yes, I'm carrying enough C4 to level this entire warehouse. If my heart stops, we all die." So let's discuss this like civilized people. You're insane, Bianchi breathed. I'm prepared. Raffaele turned to Dante. The revised plan. Now. Dante looked distinctly uncomfortable apparently. Suicide vests hadn't been part of their agreement. Raffaele, this isn't the plan. Raffaele's voice rose, his thumb twitching over the switch. You get the Eastern Territories, I get the offshore accounts and legitimate businesses. Gabriele and Bianchi are either neutralized or dead. We split the empire and move forward. That was the deal. Joan's mind raced. 60% of Gabriele's liquid assets meant millions, possibly hundreds of millions. But if Raffaele had been embezzling for 2 years, there would be digital traces, routing numbers, account transfers, authentication logs. And if she'd spotted inconsistencies in one forged document, she could find them in others. The offshore accounts, Joan said, pushing herself up to sitting despite the weapons still trained everywhere. You moved the money through shell corporations, right? Multiple layers to obscure the trail? Raffaele's eyes narrowed. What's your point, Waitress? My point is that every transaction leaves metadata, transfer timestamps, IP addresses, authentication certificates, and if you were moving that much money, you couldn't do it all at once. You'd need to spread it over months, maybe years, using automated systems. She looked at Gabriele. Do you have access to your organization's full financial records? Not just the summary reports, the actual transaction logs? Marco does, Gabriele said, never taking his eyes off Raffaele. Then have him pull them, because I'm betting Raffaele's automation wasn't perfect. There will be patterns, timing patterns, routing patterns, something that connects the transfers back to him. Joan stood slowly, hands visible and non-threatening. And once we have those patterns, we can reverse trace the money. You can't access those accounts, Raffaele sneered. They're secured behind military-grade encryption. But they still exist in a financial system with rules and regulations, Joan countered. Offshore doesn't mean invisible, it just means harder to find, and I'm really, really good at finding things that don't add up. For the first time, doubt flickered across Raffaele's face. Gabriele's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression hardening. Marco just found the first transaction cluster. 43 transfers over 6 months, all routed through accounts in the Caymans, all authenticated with your personal security credentials. He looked up, and his smile was deadly. You just used your own access codes. Sloppy. Doesn't matter, Raffaele said, but his voice had lost conviction. The money's gone. Moved to untraceable accounts. You can't get it back. Maybe not immediately, Joan said. But we can freeze the accounts with the right legal pressure. International banking regulations require... Enough! Raffaele's thumb pressed harder on the switch, and Joan saw genuine panic in his eyes. A man who'd planned everything meticulously was watching his perfect scheme unravel because of a waitress with a knack for numbers. Nobody moves. Nobody calls anyone. We're going to walk out of here together, and... The warehouse doors burst open again, but this time it wasn't security forces. It was Elena. Luca's daughter stumbled through the entrance, her hands bound, her face bruised, followed by 3 more Serpente's enforcers. One of them had a gun pressed to her head. Daddy! Elena's voice cracked with terror. Luca went white. You said she was safe. Marco, you said. She was, Marco said grimly. Someone must have tipped them off to the safe house location. I did, Raffaele said simply. Insurance policy. Now, Gabriele, here's how this actually ends. You sign over the territories to Dante. Luca stands down, and the girl lives. Otherwise, he nodded to the enforcer, who pressed the gun harder against Elena's temple. Joan watched Gabriele's face, saw the calculation warring with something else, humanity. Maybe. Or the recognition that Elena was innocent in all of this. Don't, Joan whispered, moving closer to him. There's another way. There isn't, Gabriele said quietly. He's got us cornered. He doesn't. Joan's mind worked frantically. The dead man's switch, if his heart stops, it triggers. But it has to work on a radio frequency to communicate with the explosives, right? which means it can be jammed. We don't have jamming equipment, Marco said. But we have something better. Joan pulled out her phone. Every phone in this warehouse is a potential signal disruptor if we all call the same number simultaneously. The interference might be enough to block the switch's signal for a few seconds, long enough to get everyone killed if you're wrong, Raffaele interjected. To save everyone if I'm right. Joan met Gabriele's eyes. Trust me. The words hung between them, a waitress asking a mafia boss to bet everything on her theory about radio frequencies and signal interference. Gabriele stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, sharp and decisive. Marco, Alessandro, get your people on their phones. Everyone calls. Gabriele rattled off a number, on my mark. Contractors, be ready to move the second that switch goes dead. This is insane, Dante muttered, but he was already pulling out his phone. Gabriele, please, Raffaele said, and now he just sounded desperate. Don't do this. We can still make a deal. You held a gun to an innocent girl's head, Gabriele said flatly. There's no deal. There's only consequences. Joan positioned herself, phone ready, her entire body vibrating with tension. If this didn't work, they were all about to be vaporized. If it did work, she'd just saved them again. On 3, Gabriele said. 1. Joan's thumb hovered over the call button. 2. She could see Elena crying silently, Luca's anguished face, Raffaele's growing panic. 3. 50 phones dialed simultaneously, filling the warehouse with a cacophony of ringing. The air itself seemed to crackle with interference. Raffaele looked down at his switch, confusion blooming across his features as the indicator light flickered. Then went dark. Gabriele's contractors moved with lethal precision. 3 of them tackled Raffaele before he could process what had happened, pinning him to the concrete and ripping the dead man's switch from his hand. 2 more took down the enforcers holding Elena, and suddenly Luca was running toward his daughter, pulling her into his arms. Dante raised his hands slowly. I had nothing to do with the girl. That was all, Raffaele. You're still under arrest. A new voice called from the entrance. Federal agents poured through every door, weapons drawn, badges flashing, and Joan finally understood that Gabriele had been 3 steps ahead the entire time. He'd called them, not as a threat to Dante, as an actual plan. Agent Morrison. Gabriele greeted the lead agent calmly, as if he wasn't standing in a warehouse full of weapons and criminals. Thank you for the timing. We've been listening to everything, Morrison said grimly. Raffaele Torres. Dante Reyes. You're both under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy, attempted murder, and about 15 other charges I'm going to enjoy reading to you. As agents swarmed the scene, securing suspects and clearing weapons, Joan found herself standing in the middle of chaos, her hands still shaking from adrenaline. Gabriele appeared beside her, his presence solid and grounding. You saved us. Again. I endangered us first, Joan said, her voice coming out slightly hysterical. If that signal jamming hadn't worked. It did work. He turned her toward him gently, his hands on her shoulders. Because you're brilliant and brave and completely terrifying. I'm a waitress who got lucky twice. You're the reason I still have an empire to rebuild. His eyes held something fierce and grateful and unbearably intense. Joan Carson, you're going to work for me. Not serving coffee. Doing this. This? Joan gestured around the warehouse. Nearly dying in explosions? Financial analysis, security consulting, helping me identify threats before they destroy everything. His voice softened. Staying by my side. Joan opened her mouth to respond when Morrison approached, his expression businesslike. Miss Carson? We need your statement about the document forgery. You'll be our key witness in the prosecution. Joan looked at Gabriele, then back at the agent. Sure. I can do that. But as Morrison led her toward a quiet corner for questioning, something cold touched the back of her neck, not fear exactly, but a premonition that the danger wasn't over. Because Raffaele, being loaded into a federal vehicle, caught her eye and smiled. A knowing, triumphant smile that said, You think you won, but you have no idea what's really happening. And Joan realized with sinking certainty that they'd stopped one conspiracy only to stumble into something much, much worse. Raffaele's smile haunted Joan through 3 hours of federal questioning, 2 cups of terrible coffee, and Agent Morrison's increasingly repetitive inquiries about timestamp inconsistencies. "Miss Carson? Are you listening?" Joan blinked, dragging her attention back to the agent, sitting across from her in the makeshift interview space, a corner office in a building the FBI had commandeered near the warehouse. "Sorry. Yes." The font discrepancies indicated multiple authorship sessions. Morrison studied her with the kind of patience that suggested he'd dealt with shell-shocked witnesses before. "You've been very helpful. We have enough for the prosecution. You're free to go. But we'll need you available for testimony when this goes to trial." "How long will that take?" "Months. Maybe longer if they fight extradition on some of the international charges." He closed his notebook. "In the meantime, I'd suggest keeping a low profile. Rafael Torres and Dante Reyes have connections that extend beyond what we arrested today." Joan's stomach tightened. "You think I'm in danger? I think you just took down a multi-million-dollar criminal conspiracy. People tend to hold grudges about that sort of thing." Morrison's expression softened slightly. "Mr. Marino has offered you protection. I'd accept it if I were you." The door opened before Joan could respond, and Gabriele stepped inside with the kind of easy authority that made even federal agents defer to him. He'd changed clothes at some point, the warehouse dust replaced by a fresh black shirt and slacks that made him look dangerously elegant. "Agent Morrison," Gabrielle said with polite courtesy that didn't quite mask the underlying steel. "Are we finished here?" "For now." Morrison stood, extending a hand to Joan. "Thank you for your cooperation, Miss Carson. Someone will be in touch about the trial schedule." Then he left, and suddenly, Joan was alone with Gabrielle in a small office that felt much smaller with him in it. "You changed," Joan said, because apparently her brain had decided to focus on irrelevant details instead of processing the fact that her life had completely derailed in less than 12 hours. "I keep spare clothes in the car." Gabriele moved closer, his eyes scanning her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed. "You look exhausted." "I nearly got blown up. Exhaustion seems reasonable." "It does." He reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, an intimate gesture that sent electricity down her spine. "I'm taking you somewhere safe. No arguments." "I have arguments," Joan protested weakly. "I have a life. An apartment. A mother, who's probably wondering why I haven't answered her texts in 6 hours. Call her from the car, tell her you're safe but staying with a friend for a few days." Gabriele's hand dropped but lingered near her shoulder. "Joan," Raffaele smiled at you. "That wasn't random. He knows you're the key to unraveling whatever else he's planned." The memory of that knowing smile made Joan's skin crawl. What else could he have planned? "You have his money trail. The FBI has him in custody." "We have 60% of the money trail," Gabriele corrected, "which means 40% is still missing." And Raffaele looked too confident for someone facing life in prison. "He has insurance, something we haven't found yet." Joan's analytical mind kicked into gear despite her exhaustion. If he moved 60% through one method, the remaining 40% would use a different approach. Something harder to trace. Maybe physical assets instead of digital transfers? Possibly. Gabriele guided her toward the door with a hand at the small of her back. "But we're not figuring it out tonight. Tonight you sleep somewhere secure while I rebuild what's left of my organization." "How bad is it?" Joan asked as they walked through the building's corridors, agents nodding respectfully at Gabriele as they passed. "The damage Raffaele caused, I mean." Gabriele was quiet for a moment. "Bad enough that I need to restructure completely, cut out anyone who might have been compromised, verify every account, every transaction, every operation. It'll take weeks, maybe months." "I could help with that," Joan offered, then immediately felt ridiculous. "I mean, if you want. I'm good with numbers and patterns. It's literally all I'm good at." Gabriele stopped walking, turning to face her with an expression that made her breath catch. You're good at saving my life. At seeing what everyone else misses. At being brave when you have every reason to run." His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing across her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "Don't diminish yourself, Joan Carson. You're extraordinary." Joan's heart stuttered. Standing this close, she could see gold flecks in his dark eyes, could smell cedar and something uniquely him, could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I served coffee yesterday," she whispered. "Today I'm apparently extraordinary. That's quite a promotion." His mouth curved into a smile that transformed his entire face, softening the hard edges, revealing the man beneath the Mafia boss. "You were always extraordinary. You just needed the right circumstances to show it." "Life-threatening circumstances?" "I would have preferred less dramatic circumstances," Gabrielle admitted, "but I'll take what fate gives me." The moment stretched, charged with electricity and possibility, and Joan found herself leaning forward slightly, drawn by gravity or magnetism or simple human need for connection. Then Gabrielle's phone buzzed, shattering the spell. He pulled back with visible reluctance, checking the screen. His expression hardened. "We need to go. Now." "What's wrong?" "Luca just found something in Raffaele's office." Gabrielle's hand found hers, lacing their fingers together. A secondary set of documents, a contingency plan. They practically ran to the car, a different vehicle this time, sleek and dark, and definitely armored. Marco was behind the wheel, his face grim. "Boss, you need to see this," Marco said as they climbed in. He handed back a tablet displaying scanned documents. Joan leaned over Gabrielle's shoulder, her eyes racing across the pages. It was another treaty. But this one wasn't about territory transfers. It was about her. "What the hell?" Joan breathed, seeing her own name highlighted in legal text that made her blood run cold. The document outlined a plan to frame her as an accomplice, someone who'd helped Raffaele identify vulnerabilities in Gabrielle's organization, who'd deliberately exposed the first forgery to gain trust, who'd been working with the Serpentes the entire time, complete with fabricated evidence, financial transfers into an account bearing her name, email correspondence she'd never written, even photographs that had been digitally altered to show her meeting with known criminals. "This is insane," Joan said, her voice shaking. I didn't." "I know." Gabrielle's arm wrapped around her shoulders, pulling her against his side. "It's fabricated, all of it, but it's sophisticated enough to fool a jury if they don't examine it closely. Why would he do this?" Joan looked up at Gabrielle, fear clawing at her chest. "What does he gain by destroying me?" "Leverage," Marco said from the front seat. "If the prosecution's key witness is discredited, the entire case becomes shaky. And if Joan's framed as an accomplice, it casts doubt on every piece of evidence she helped uncover." Joan felt sick. So stopping the explosion and helping expose him wasn't enough. "Now I'm going to prison for crimes I didn't commit?" "No," Gabrielle said with absolute conviction. "You're not, because we're going to prove every single document is fake before the prosecution even sees them." "How?" "The same way you exposed the first forgery, by finding the inconsistencies." Gabrielle pulled up the financial transfer records on the tablet. "Look at this account, supposedly in your name. What do you see?" Joan forced herself to focus despite the panic, making her hands shake. The account had been opened 6 months ago. Deposits had been made regularly since then, totaling nearly $200,000. But something was wrong. "The routing number?" Joan said slowly, her analytical brain overriding her fear. "It's for a bank in Delaware, but the account statements show branch transactions in Nevada. Delaware banks don't have branches in Nevada, they're regional institutions." "Good," Gabrielle encouraged. "What else?" "The deposits, they're all in round numbers. 5,000, 10,000, 15,000. Real money laundering usually involves irregular amounts to avoid detection patterns." Joan scrolled through more pages, finding her rhythm. "And the email correspondence, look at the timestamp metadata. These emails were supposedly sent from my phone, but the IP addresses show VPN routing through servers I've never accessed." "Because you didn't send them," Gabriella said. Raffaele created all of this the same way he created the first forgery, sophisticated but not perfect. There are always inconsistencies. We need to document everything, Joan said, her fear transmuting into determination. Every discrepancy, every impossible detail. Build a countercase before the prosecution discovers these documents. Already on it, Marco called back. I've got our forensic team pulling metadata and authentication records. We'll have a full analysis by morning. The car pulled up to a building Joan didn't recognize. Modern, secure, with the kind of entrance that suggested serious money and serious security. Where are we? She asked. My private residence, Gabriella said. Top 3 floors, secured perimeter, vetted staff, and enough surveillance to know if anyone comes within 100 feet of the building. You live in a fortress. I live in a place where people I care about are safe. His eyes held hers. You'll stay here. Guest suite on the 2nd floor. Everything you need will be provided. Joan wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could take care of herself, that she didn't need protection, that this was all moving too fast. But Raffaele's smile haunted her. The fabricated evidence haunted her. The realization that she'd become a target haunted her. Okay, she said quietly. But I'm helping with the investigation. Full access to the documents, the financial records, everything. If we're proving I'm innocent, I'm part of the team. Gabrielle's smile was warm, proud, and unbearably tender. I wouldn't have it any other way. They rode the elevator up in comfortable silence, and Joan found herself studying Gabrielle's profile, the strong jaw, the slight shadow of stubble, the way his eyes reflected in the mirrored walls, showing both darkness and unexpected warmth. Thank you, she said softly, for believing me, for protecting me, for... She gestured vaguely. Everything, I guess. Joan. He turned to her, and the intensity in his gaze made her knees weak. I don't just believe you, I trust you with my empire, my life, my future. That's not something I give lightly. We barely know each other. I know everything that matters. His hand found hers again. I know you're brilliant, brave, and incapable of letting injustice stand. I know you see patterns everyone else misses. I know you saved me twice in one day. And I know... His voice dropped to something rough and honest. I know I don't want to let you go. The elevator doors opened, but neither of them moved. Joan's phone buzzed, breaking the moment. She glanced at it reflexively, then froze. Unknown number. New message. The documents are just the beginning. If you want to know what Raffaele really planned, meet me at the East River Pier at midnight. Come alone, or Gabriele dies. Below the text was a photograph. Gabriele's main office, taken from inside, showing details only someone with access could have captured. Someone in his organization was still working against them, and they had Joan exactly where they wanted her. Joan stared at the photograph on her phone. Gabriele's office captured in crystal clarity, showing the antique desk, the wall safe, even the personal family photo he kept turned away from visitors. Whoever took this had intimate access. Joan? Gabriele's voice pulled her back. What's wrong? She should tell him, should show him the message immediately and let him handle it with his security team and tactical planning. Instead, Joan heard herself say, Nothing, just my mother checking in again. The lie tasted like ash, but the message had been clear. Come alone, or Gabriele dies. Show me. Gabriella reached for her phone, and Joan's heart nearly stopped. She pulled back reflexively. It's just she's worried. I'll call her later. Joan forced a smile that felt like cracking glass. Can I see that guest suite now? I'm exhausted. Suspicion flickered across Gabriele's face, but he nodded slowly. This way. He led her down a hallway lined with understated art originals, Joan realized with distant surprise, not prints. The guest suite was more luxurious than her entire apartment, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a bed that could sleep 4, and a bathroom with marble that probably cost more than her student debt. Everything you need should be here, Gabriella said, lingering in the doorway. If not, there's an intercom. Press 9 for the kitchen, 7 for security, 1 for... He paused. 1 reaches me directly. Got it. Joan set her phone face down on the nightstand, hyper-aware of the ticking clock. It was just past 9. She had 3 hours to figure out how to get to the East River Pier without Gabriele or his security knowing. Impossible. Completely impossible. Gabriele moved closer, and Joan's breath caught as he reached up to cup her face with both hands, a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. Whatever you're thinking about doing, he said quietly, don't. I'm thinking about sleeping. You're thinking about that message you just received. His thumb traced her cheekbone. I can see it in your eyes. Someone threatened you, and now you're calculating whether you can handle it alone. Joan's throat tightened. I don't know what you're... Joan. Just her name, but it carried weight. Trust me. She wanted to. God, she wanted to trust him with everything, the message, the threat, the photograph that proved his inner circle was compromised. But the words echoed in her mind. Come alone, or Gabriele dies. I do trust you, Joan said, and it wasn't entirely a lie. I'm just processing everything. It's been a very long day of nearly dying. Gabriele studied her for a long moment, then kissed her forehead, a brief, devastating touch that made something in Joan's chest crack open. Get some rest. We'll deal with everything else tomorrow. He left, closing the door softly behind him. Joan counted to 60, then pulled out her phone with shaking hands. The message was still there. The photograph still proof of infiltration. Midnight at the East River Pier. 90 minutes away. She opened her phone's notepad and started typing a detailed explanation of everything, just in case. If this went wrong, if she didn't come back, at least Gabriele would know why she'd made this choice. I'm sorry. Someone in your organization is still working against you, and they threatened to kill you if I didn't come alone. The photograph shows your private office details only an insider would have. I couldn't risk your life. I know this is stupid, but I don't see another choice. The meeting is at the East River Pier at midnight. If I'm not back by 1 a.m., assume the worst. Joan. She saved it as a draft, set to send automatically at 12:30 a.m. Then she examined the suite's windows. They didn't open security feature probably, but there was a balcony accessible through the living area. Joan changed into the darkest clothes she could find in the provided wardrobe, black jeans and a navy sweater that were close enough to tactical wear if she squinted. Then she waited, watching the clock tick toward 11. At 11:15, she crept out of the guest suite. The apartment was quiet. Gabriele had probably retreated to his own space, and the security team was focused on external threats, not internal movement. Joan made it to the balcony, her heart hammering. 12 floors up. No fire escape, no obvious way down except... She looked at the neighboring building, close enough that the balconies were only about 6 feet apart. This is insane, Joan whispered to herself. You're a data analyst, not a parkour expert. But Gabriele's life was on the line. Joan climbed onto the balcony railing, her hands slick with sweat despite the cool night air. The gap looked wider from up here, maybe 7 feet, maybe 8. If she missed... Don't think about missing. She jumped. For one terrifying moment, she was airborne, nothing but 12 stories of empty space below her. Then her hands caught the opposite railing, the impact jarring her shoulders. Joan hauled herself over, collapsing onto the neighbor's balcony with a grace that could generously be described as, didn't die. Okay, she panted. Okay. That happened. The neighboring apartment was dark, empty. Joan picked the balcony door lock with a hairpin, a skill she'd learned from a YouTube video during a particularly boring study break and never thought she'd actually use. 20 minutes later, she was on the street, hailing a taxi that smelled like pine air freshener and regret. East River Pier, she told the driver, then added, and maybe circle the block once before dropping me off. The driver eyed her in the mirror. You okay, miss? Peachy, Joan lied. Just being cautious. The pier was dark when she arrived, industrial, abandoned, the kind of place where bad things happened in crime procedurals. Water lapped against rotting posts, and somewhere in the distance, a ship's horn echoed mournfully. Joan checked her phone. 11:57 p.m. She was early. Footsteps echoed behind her, and Joan spun around, her hand instinctively reaching for a weapon she didn't have. A figure emerged from the shadows, not a Serpente's enforcer, not Raffaele's associate, but someone Joan recognized from La Sera. Antonio, one of Gabrielle's senior managers. Mid-40s, competent, trusted. A traitor. "Miss Carson," Antonio said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thank you for coming alone." "You're the mole." Joan's mind raced through implications. "You took that photograph. You've been feeding information to Raffaele." "For 3 years," Antonio confirmed almost proudly. "Gabriele trusts too easily. It made infiltration remarkably simple." "What do you want?" "What I've always wanted. Control. Power. A seat at the table instead of standing behind it." Antonio pulled out a tablet similar to the one Dante had used. "Raffaele's contingency plan wasn't just about framing you, it was about replacing Gabriele entirely. A quiet coup, using legal mechanisms, fabricated evidence, and internal support. Support from you. And others. Gabriele's inner circle is more fractured than he realizes." Antonio tapped the tablet. "But you've become a problem. Your pattern recognition, your ability to spot inconsistencies, you're too dangerous to leave alive." Joan's stomach dropped. "You're going to kill me! Eventually. First, you're going to help me access Gabriele's personal accounts, the ones even Raffaele couldn't reach." Antonio smiled. "Your gift for numbers makes you valuable. For now. And if I refuse?" Antonio pulled out a phone, showing Joan a live video feed. Her apartment. Her mother, visible through the window washing dishes in the kitchen. "Then your mother has a very unfortunate accident," Antonio said calmly. "Your choice, Miss Carson. Cooperate, and she lives. Refuse, and you watch her die." Joan's vision tunneled. This wasn't about Gabriele anymore. This was about her mother, the woman who'd worked 2 jobs to help pay for Joan's education, who'd never asked for anything except her daughter's happiness. "How do I know you'll keep your word?" Joan's voice came out steady despite the terror flooding her system. "You don't," Antonio admitted, "but it's the only offer you're getting." Behind him, the pier stretched into darkness. No witnesses, no escape routes. Just Joan, a traitor, and an impossible choice. Joan's hand moved to her pocket, fingers finding her phone. The automatic message wouldn't send for another 30 minutes. Too late to help her, but maybe soon enough to help Gabriele. "Fine," she said. "I'll cooperate, but I need access to Gabriele's systems, security clearances, authentication. Already arranged." Antonio gestured toward a car waiting in the darkness. "We're going back to his building. You'll use your guest access to get us into his private office. Then you'll crack his personal safe." "I'm not a safecracker." "No, but you understand patterns, number sequences, and Gabriele's safe uses a 12-digit code based on a personal algorithm." Antonio's smile widened. "You'll figure it out. You always do." Joan walked toward the car on numb legs, her mind racing through options. She could fight, probably get killed. She could run, her mother would die. She could cooperate, and hope for an opening, a chance, anything. But as she reached the car door, she saw something that made her blood run cold. In the back seat, Luca. Bound, gagged, his face bruised, his eyes desperate above the duct tape. "Insurance," Antonio explained casually. "Luca discovered my involvement an hour ago. Had to neutralize him before he warned Gabriele. Now he gets to watch you betray the man who trusted you both." The car door opened, and Joan climbed in beside Luca, meeting his anguished gaze. "I'm sorry," she mouthed. But Luca shook his head frantically, his eyes cutting to something behind Antonio. A shadow moved in the darkness beyond the pier. Then another. Antonio turned, realization dawning too late. "Going somewhere?" Gabriele's voice cut through the night like a blade. He stepped into the dim light, flanked by Marco and a dozen armed men. His expression was absolute zero, cold, lethal, and utterly unforgiving. His eyes found Joan's, and she saw hurt flash across his features before fury replaced it. "I can explain," Joan started. "You jumped off a 12-story balcony," Gabriele interrupted, his voice dangerously soft, "rather than trust me with the truth. So please, Joan, explain." Antonio's hand moved toward his jacket. Gabriele's gun was out and pressed to the traitor's temple before he could complete the motion. "Move again," Gabriele said quietly, "and I paint this pier with your brain matter." Marco moved past them to free Luca, cutting through the restraints with efficient brutality. And Joan, sitting in the car with her heart in her throat and tears stinging her eyes, realized she'd made a catastrophic mistake. She'd underestimated exactly how prepared Gabriele Marino could be when protecting someone he cared about. "The tracker," she breathed. "You put a tracker in my phone." "In the phone I gave you, yes." Gabriele hauled Antonio out of the car with vicious force. "Did you really think I'd let you leave my protection unwatched?" "He threatened my mother." "Your mother is fine," Gabriele interrupted. "I had security watching her apartment from the moment you received that first threat. She's safe, Joan. She was always safe." Relief and fury and a dozen other emotions crashed over Joan simultaneously. "You could have told me. You could have trusted me," Gabriele shot back, his control fracturing. "Instead, you lied to my face and jumped off a goddamn building. To protect you." "To protect me?" Gabriele's laugh was sharp, humorless. "Joan, I've survived 3 assassination attempts, a hostile takeover, and 15 years in this life. I don't need protection from a waitress with a death wish." The words hit like a slap. Joan climbed out of the car, her legs shaking. "Then I guess we're done here. You've got your traitor. My mother's safe. I'll just—" Her voice cracked. "I'll just go." She made it 3 steps before Gabriele caught her wrist, spinning her back to face him. "We're not done," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We're nowhere near done. You just called me a waitress with a death wish." "You are a waitress with a death wish." Gabriele pulled her closer, his free hand cupping her face. "You're brilliant and brave, and you make me insane with worry because you keep throwing yourself into danger to save people who should be saving you. I don't need saving." "Neither do I, apparently." His thumb traced her cheekbone, the gentleness at odds with his fury. "But here we are, 2 people who don't need saving, driving each other crazy trying to protect one another." Joan's anger wavered. "You put a tracker in my phone. You jumped off a building. You had my mother under surveillance. You were going to crack my safe for a traitor." They stared at each other, both breathing hard, the tension between them electric and overwhelming. "This is insane," Joan whispered. "Completely," Gabriele agreed. Then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, furious, overwhelming, the culmination of 24 hours of terror and adrenaline and emotions neither of them knew how to process. Joan's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer as his arms wrapped around her with crushing intensity. When they finally broke apart, both breathing ragged, Gabriele pressed his forehead to hers. "Don't ever do that again," he said hoarsely. "Which part? The lying or the balcony jumping?" "Any of it." His arms tightened. "You're mine to protect now, that's non-negotiable." "I don't belong to anyone," Joan protested weakly. "Then belong with me." Gabriele pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. "Stay by my side. Not as an employee or a witness, but as—" He paused, searching for words. "As someone I can't lose." Joan's heart stuttered. "Gabriele," Marco's urgent voice interrupted. "Boss, we've got a problem." They turned to see Antonio smiling despite the gun still pressed to his head. "You think I came alone?" The traitor's laugh was unhinged. "You think this ends with me?" He pressed something in his pocket. The pier exploded in gunfire. Gabriele tackled Joan to the ground, his body covering hers as bullets tore through the night. She could hear shouting, "Return fire," the distinctive sound of suppressed weapons from professional shooters. Antonio's backup had arrived. And they were outnumbered. Bullets carved through the night air inches above Joan's head as Gabriele pressed her against the cold pier, his body a shield between her and the chaos erupting around them. "Stay down!" he shouted over the gunfire, returning fire with lethal precision. Joan's face was pressed against rough wood that smelled like salt and oil, her ears ringing from weapons discharging too close. She could hear Marco coordinating their defense, could see muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness like deadly fireflies. Antonio was laughing, actually laughing even as one of Gabriele's men dragged him behind cover. "You can't win this," the traitor called out gleefully. "There are too many of us. We've been planning this for years." Gabriele fired 3 more shots, each one finding its target with professional accuracy. "Marco, how many?" "At least 15. Maybe 20. They've got the high ground on both sides." Marco's voice was grim. "We need extraction." "Already called it in," Luca shouted from somewhere to their left. 2 minutes out. 2 minutes. Joan's mind calculated survival odds and came up with numbers she didn't like. Something metallic clattered near them, a grenade rolling across the pier. Gabriele cursed, grabbed Joan around the waist, and threw them both into the freezing river. The water hit like 1,000 knives, stealing Joan's breath, dragging her down into darkness that pressed from all sides. Strong arms kept her close as they sank, bubbles streaming upward, the muffled explosion above sending shockwaves through the water. Then Gabriele was pulling them up, breaking the surface behind a piling that provided cover from the gunfire still tearing through the night. Joan gasped for air, clinging to the wooden post with numb fingers. There was a grenade. "Breathe," Gabriele commanded, his arm locked around her waist. "Stay quiet and breathe." Above them, the firefight continued. Joan could hear shouting, the distinctive crack of different caliber weapons, and then sirens. Police, multiple units converging on their location. "About time," Gabriele muttered, but Joan heard relief beneath the irritation. Antonio's voice rose above the chaos. "Fall back! Everyone out!" The gunfire became sporadic, then stopped entirely as the attackers retreated into the industrial maze surrounding the pier. Gabriele waited another 30 seconds before calling out, "Marco?" "Here, boss. 3 men down, 5 wounded. We held position." Marco appeared at the pier's edge, extending a hand. "Also, you're both hypothermic and need to get out of that water immediately." Gabriele boosted Joan up first, and hands pulled her onto the pier where she collapsed, shaking violently from cold and adrenaline. Someone wrapped a jacket around her shoulders. Luca, his face concerned despite his own injuries. "Thank you," Joan managed through chattering teeth. "For everything." "You tried to save Gabriele," Luca said simply. "That makes us even." Gabriele hauled himself onto the pier, water streaming from his clothes, his expression dark as he surveyed the scene. 3 of his men lay motionless. 5 others were being treated for gunshot wounds. And Antonio was gone. "He escaped during the chaos," Marco reported, "took advantage of the grenade diversion. But he left something behind." Marco held up a tablet, the same one Antonio had been carrying. Gabriele took it, his jaw tightening as he scrolled through the contents. "Joan, I need you to look at this." Joan moved closer on shaking legs, peering at the screen over his shoulder. Financial records, account transfers, communication logs between Antonio and at least 8 other people inside the Marino organization. But it was the final document that made her stomach drop. A complete organizational chart showing every compromised position, every traitor, every piece of the conspiracy, including one name highlighted at the very top. The mastermind behind everything. "No," Joan whispered. "That's impossible." Because the name at the top wasn't Raffaele, wasn't Antonio, wasn't even someone from the Serpentes cartel. It was Elena, Luca's daughter. The architecture student they'd rescued, the innocent victim who'd been held hostage. "That can't be right," Luca said, his voice breaking as he looked over their shoulders. "My daughter, she was threatened, she's a victim." "She's 23 years old," Joan said slowly, her analytical mind piecing together details she'd missed. "Old enough to open offshore accounts, to coordinate with criminals, to..." She looked up at Gabriele. "When exactly did the money start disappearing?" Gabriele's expression was stone. 3 years ago. "And when did Elena start university?" 3 years ago. Luca's face had gone gray. No, you're wrong. Someone's framing her. Someone. His phone rang. They all stared at it. Answer it, Gabriella said quietly. Luca's hand shook as he accepted the call, putting it on speaker. Daddy? Elena's voice came through, sweet and familiar. I heard there was trouble at the pier. Are you okay? Elena, baby, where are you? At my apartment, studying. A pause. Why? What's wrong? We found some documents, Luca said carefully. Financial records. Your name is on them. Silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. Then Elena laughed, a sound completely different from her usual bright cheerfulness. Colder. Calculated. Well, she said. I suppose we're past pretending now. Luca's face crumpled. No. Please, no. I'm sorry, Daddy. I really am. But Gabrielle's old-fashioned methods were never going to build a real empire. Someone had to be bold enough to reach for more. Her voice hardened. Raffaele understood that. Antonio understood that. And soon, everyone will understand when I'm running the Eastern Seaboard. You're 23, Joan said, unable to help herself. You're in architecture school. I'm 23 and smarter than everyone who underestimated me because I smile sweetly and pretend to care about building designs. Elena's laugh was bitter. Do you know how easy it was? How simple it was to manipulate my own father? To play the victim while orchestrating everything behind the scenes? The hostage situation, Gabriella said, that was staged. Obviously. I needed Daddy compromised and desperate, needed him to push you toward signing that first treaty. You were supposed to destroy each other while I consolidated power. A sigh. But then that waitress had to notice things she shouldn't have. Joan felt Gabrielle's hand find hers, squeezing gently. Elena, Luca's voice broke. Please, come home. We'll fix this. Whatever happened, whatever made you do this, we can... There's nothing to fix, Daddy. I'm not broken. I'm just better than you realized. Another pause. Goodbye. I'll send flowers to your funeral. The call ended. Luca collapsed to his knees, his anguished sob echoing across the pier. Joan looked at Gabriele, saw fury and calculation warring in his expression. She's running. She is, Gabriella agreed. But not fast enough. Marco, pull every security feed in the city. Find her. I want Elena Moretti in custody within the hour. On it. Marco was already coordinating with his team. Police were swarming the pier now, federal agents close behind. Agent Morrison approached, his expression grim but unsurprised. Marino, he greeted. Convenient timing with the extraction call. Almost like you knew this was coming. I knew someone had compromised my organization, Gabriella replied evenly. I didn't know who until tonight. Now I do, and I'm sharing that information willingly. Elena Moretti is your target. Everything else, he gestured to the tablet, is documented evidence. Morrison examined the device, his eyebrows rising. This is remarkably organized for criminal conspiracy records. Elena was always detail-oriented, Luca said hoarsely, still kneeling on the pier. Even as a child, everything had to be perfect. Joan felt sympathy pierce through her exhaustion. Luca had been manipulated by his own daughter, betrayed by the person he'd tried desperately to protect. I'm sorry, she said quietly, crouching beside him. I know it doesn't help, but I'm sorry. Luca looked at her with red-rimmed eyes. You saved Gabriele. Twice. That's more than I ever did. You saved him tonight, Joan corrected gently. When it mattered most. Gabriele pulled Joan to her feet, his arms secure around her waist. We're going to the hospital. Both of you. Marco can coordinate the search. I'm fine, Joan started. You jumped into a freezing river after being shot at, Gabriele interrupted. You're going to the hospital, and then you're going somewhere with actual security where Elena can't reach you. Where's that? His smile was grim. With me. Always. Morrison cleared his throat. Before you two disappear into protective custody, I need Miss Carson's statement about... Marco's phone rang, cutting him off. He answered, listened. Then his expression darkened. Boss. We've got a problem. Another one? Joan asked weakly. Elena's not at her apartment, but we tracked her phone. Marco turned his screen around, showing a location map. The tracking dot was moving fast toward a private airfield outside the city, and the timestamp showed she'd been there for the past 30 minutes, while they'd been talking to her. While Luca had been begging his daughter to come home, she'd already been preparing to disappear. "She's running," Gabriele said flatly, "with everything she stole, everything she built, and 3 years of planning to disappear." "Can we stop her?" Joan asked. Marco's expression was grim. "Not unless we move now. She's got a 15-minute head start, and private jets don't require the same security protocols as commercial flights." Gabriele turned to Morrison. "I need your badge and your authority to ground all flights from that airfield. I can't just—" "Elena Moretti is about to flee the country with evidence of criminal conspiracies spanning 3 states, Gabriele interrupted. "Your badge, Agent Morrison, now." Morrison stared at him for a long moment, then handed over his credentials. "If this goes wrong, it won't." Gabriele was already moving toward the vehicles, pulling Joan with him. "Because we're ending this tonight." They piled into cars, sirens screaming as they raced toward the airfield. And Joan, soaking wet and exhausted and terrified, held tight to Gabriele's hand and prayed they wouldn't be too late. But when they arrived at the airfield 15 minutes later, the runway was empty. The private jet was gone. And Elena Moretti had vanished into the night sky, taking Gabriele's empire with her. The empty runway stretched before them like a taunt, smooth asphalt gleaming under floodlights, tire marks still fresh where Elena's jet had departed minutes earlier. Joan stood beside Gabriele, both of them dripping river water onto the tarmac, watching the distant navigation lights disappear into the night sky. Behind them, federal agents swarmed the airfield, but everyone knew the truth. Elena Moretti was gone. "Boss," Marco said quietly, approaching with a tablet. "Flight plan shows she's headed to the Cayman Islands. No extradition treaty. By the time we get legal authorization to pursue, she'll have vanished into a dozen shell corporations." Gabriele's expression was carved from ice. "How much did she take, according to the final accounting?" Marco's jaw tightened. $42 million in liquid assets. Another $60 million in property deeds, business holdings, and leverage over legitimate operations. She didn't just steal from you, she dismantled the infrastructure. Joan felt Gabriele's hand tighten around hers. The only outward sign of the fury she knew was burning beneath his control. "So, that's it?" Luca's voice was hollow as he joined them, his face aged a decade in the past hour. "My daughter destroys everything, and she just flies away?" "No," Gabriele said quietly, dangerously. "She flies away for now." But Elena made one critical mistake. "What's that?" Joan asked. Gabriele turned to her, and despite everything, the exhaustion, the betrayal, the staggering losses, his smile held something fierce and certain. "She underestimated what I'm willing to rebuild, and who I'm building it with?" Agent Morrison approached, his credentials returned, his expression sympathetic. "We'll pursue every legal avenue, Marino. But realistically, Elena planned her exit too well. She's been moving assets for months, creating false trails, establishing backup identities. Even if we find her, prosecution will take years." "I'm not interested in prosecution," Gabriele replied. "I'm interested in recovery. And rebuilding." Morrison studied him carefully. "Stay on the right side of the law, whatever you're planning." "Will be completely legitimate," Gabriele assured him. "Starting now, the Marino organization operates clean. No more shadows, no more vulnerabilities someone can exploit." "Boss," Marco interrupted, his voice urgent. "You need to see this." He pulled up security footage on his tablet, not from the airfield, but from Elena's apartment, time-stamped 30 minutes before her call to Luca. The video showed Elena methodically packing, but she wasn't alone. Someone was helping her, a figure whose face the camera caught in profile, Antonio. He didn't escape during the firefight, Joan realized. He was never at the pier. That was a decoy, someone wearing his jacket, his build. The real Antonio was helping Elena prepare her exit. "Which means the tablet we recovered," Gabriele said slowly, was planted. She wanted us to find it, wanted us to think we'd uncovered everything while she escaped with the real leverage. Marco's expression was grim. There's more. I pulled financial records from the past 6 hours. Elena didn't just take liquid assets she borrowed against every property, every holding, every piece of collateral the Marino family owns. You're not just missing $100 million, boss. You're leveraged into debt that'll take decades to repay. The weight of that statement settled over them like concrete. Gabriella had lost everything. Not just money, but reputation, infrastructure, the foundation his family had built over 3 generations. Joan watched his face, waiting for the explosion of rage or despair. Instead, Gabriele laughed, a genuine sound that made everyone turn in surprise. She's brilliant, he said with something that might have been admiration beneath the fury. Absolutely, terrifyingly brilliant. I trained my people too well. This isn't funny, Luca said hoarsely. My daughter just destroyed you. She destroyed us all. She tried, Gabriele corrected, but she made one assumption that will be her downfall. What assumption? Morrison asked. Gabriele turned to Joan, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her pulse race. That I measure my empire in money and property. That losing assets means losing power. His hand came up to cup her face with devastating tenderness. But my real power was always in seeing what others miss, in finding the right people, in building something that matters beyond bank accounts. Joan's throat tightened. Gabriele. Elena took everything she could carry, he continued, his voice steady with conviction. But she couldn't take my connections, my relationships, the loyalty I've earned over 15 years. She couldn't take the legitimate businesses that operate under my protection. And she definitely couldn't take you. I'm just a waitress who got lucky twice, Joan protested weakly. You're the person who saved my empire before I even knew it needed saving. Gabriele's thumb traced her cheekbone. You're brilliant, fearless, and you see patterns everyone else misses. Elena planned for years to take me down. You stopped her in 24 hours. So tell me, Joan Carson, who's really more valuable? Joan felt tears sting her eyes, exhaustion, relief, and something else she wasn't ready to name. We're standing on an empty runway. Your organization is in ruins. I don't understand how you can be so calm. Because I've been here before, Gabriele said simply. When my father died, I inherited a fractured family and enemies circling like sharks. I rebuilt then, I'll rebuild now, but this time, his smile turned warm, genuine. I'm not doing it alone. He released Joan's face, turning to address the assembled group, Marco, Luca, Morrison, the remaining loyal soldiers who'd fought beside them. Elena thinks she won, Gabriella announced, his voice carrying across the tarmac with commanding force. She thinks destroying the Marino family financially means destroying it completely. She's wrong. Starting tomorrow, we restructure everything, legitimate operations only, clean books, full cooperation with federal oversight. We rebuild the right way. That'll take years, Marco pointed out, and you're starting from negative assets. Then we start from negative assets, Gabriele replied. I'd rather build something real than maintain something corrupt. Morrison's expression shifted to something approaching respect. If you're serious about going legitimate, the FBI could use someone with your organizational skills, consulting basis, help us understand how criminal enterprises operate from the inside. In exchange for protection for your people, immunity for past activities under specific circumstances, and, Morrison glanced at Joan, security for civilians who get caught in the crossfire. Gabriele considered this, then nodded once. I'll want everything in writing, full legal protections, and Joan's safety is non-negotiable. Agreed. Morrison extended his hand. They shook, sealing an alliance that would have been impossible 24 hours earlier. Luca approached Gabriele, his shoulders bowed under the weight of his daughter's betrayal. I failed you. I should have seen, should have known. You loved your daughter, Gabriele interrupted gently. That's not a failure. That's being human. His hand gripped Luca's shoulder. We'll find her, not for revenge, for accountability. Elena needs to answer for what she's done. But that's a long game. Right now, we survive, we rebuild, we remember who we are. Joan watched this moment of compassion, seeing beneath Gabriele's dangerous exterior to the man who valued loyalty and understood pain. "So what happens now?" she asked quietly. Gabriele turned back to her, and his smile held promise and challenge in equal measure. "Now? We go back to La Sera. You quit your waitressing job properly this time, no disappearing mid-shift. Then you move into my building, accept a position as my financial analyst and strategic consultant, and help me build something that Elena could never touch." "That's presumptuous," Joan said, but she couldn't suppress her smile. "What if I don't want to work for you? Then, work with me." Gabriele moved closer, his presence overwhelming in the best way. "Not as an employee. As a partner. Someone who challenges me, questions me, keeps me honest." His voice dropped to something intimate despite their audience. "Someone I trust with everything I'm about to become." Joan's analytical mind raced through implications, the danger, the complications, the absolute insanity of tying herself to a man whose life was measured in gunfights and federal investigations. Then she thought about the past day. About noticing what no one else saw. About mattering in ways she'd never imagined. About standing beside someone powerful and being treated as an equal. "I want full access to all financial records," Joan said. "Complete transparency. And if I find anything that doesn't add up, I get to call it out without consequences." "Agreed. And I'm not jumping off any more balconies." "Strongly agreed. And you never ever put a tracker in my phone without telling me first." Gabriele's smile turned sheepish. "I should probably mention..." Joan held up her hand, stopping him. "Actually, don't tell me. I don't want to know what other security measures you've got running. Just..." She met his eyes steadily. "Just promise you'll keep me safe." "Always," Gabriele said, and the certainty in his voice made it a vow. "You saved my empire, Joan. Now let me give you one in return." He kissed her then, not the desperate, furious collision from the pier, but something slower, deeper, weighted with promise and possibility. Joan felt the world narrow to this moment, the man holding her like she was precious, the distant sirens fading, the future unfolding with terrifying potential. When they finally broke apart, Marco was pointedly studying his phone, Luca was wiping his eyes, and Morrison looked almost amused. "If you're done making life-altering decisions on my crime scene," the agent said dryly, "we have paperwork to complete." Joan laughed, the sound bright and unexpected after everything. "Is this my life now? Kissing mafia bosses on FBI crime scenes?" "Former mafia boss," Gabriele corrected with a grin. "I'm going legitimate, remember?" "Right. Because that makes this completely normal." They walked back toward the vehicles together. Gabriele's arm secure around her waist, and Joan realized something fundamental had shifted. 24 hours ago she'd been invisible, just another person grinding through unremarkable days. Now she was seen, valued, essential, terrifying, thrilling, hers. The sun was rising over the city as they drove back, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Joan watched it through the car window, Gabriele's hand warm in hers, and felt something like peace settle over her exhaustion. Elena had escaped. The empire was in ruins, the future was uncertain. But Joan Carson had found where she belonged. And Gabriele Marino had found someone worth rebuilding everything for. 2 months later, Joan stood in the reconstructed Marino offices, legitimate, legal, and completely above board, reviewing financial statements that actually made sense for the first time in years. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Enjoying my leftovers? Don't get too comfortable. E." Joan smiled, forwarding the message to Morrison and Gabriele simultaneously. Elena thought she'd won by escaping. But Joan had spent 2 months building something real, something lasting, something that couldn't be stolen or destroyed. And when Elena eventually surfaced, and she would, because people like that always got overconfident, Joan would be ready. With numbers, with evidence, with Gabriele by her side. She saved the financial report, closed her laptop, and walked into Gabriele's office where he was reviewing legitimate business contracts with actual lawyers. "Elena messaged," Joan said without preamble. Gabriele looked up, his expression hardening for just a moment before softening when he saw her. And nothing. She can send all the threatening messages she wants from the Caymans. Joan perched on the edge of his desk. "We're building something she can't touch. Let her watch from a distance while we succeed without her stolen money." Gabriele's smile was warm, proud, and unbearably tender. "Have I mentioned lately that you're extraordinary?" "Not in the past hour," Joan teased. "You're slipping." He stood, moving around the desk to pull her into his arms. "Then, let me remedy that. You're extraordinary, brilliant, and the best decision I never knew I was making when you interrupted my signing." "Best decision you tried to send away," Joan corrected. "Remember? Get her out of here." "One of my rare bad judgments." His lips brushed her temple. "Won't happen again." Joan leaned into him, feeling safe and seen and exactly where she belonged. The empire was rebuilt. The danger was distant. The future was theirs. And somewhere in the Cayman Islands, Elena Moretti was learning a hard truth. You could steal money, property, and power. But you couldn't steal the one thing that mattered most: the loyalty of people who chose to stay.